Thank you. 女士们、先生们、各位来宾、各位领导，大家几点？下午好。哎呀，经常会问到这个 mix up。一般来讲啊，我来发言这个事情，我不会准备这个稿子嘛 speech。但是我看你们这个 LBS 那么认真啊，很聪明啊，我就觉得我对不起你们，所以我真的我准备了这个，我尽量很快过一遍，然后后面如果有几分钟的时间可以提一些问题，好吧 ？OK， 谢谢。I'm doing the speech in English, by the way, so that was just a little opener. Let me say something. This is on the topic of rewiring globalization and the connection to China. So where I'm standing today is not just geographically in this remarkable institution in Regent's Park, but also standing in between somewhere intellectually. I'm speaking to you just after, I hope you had the panel before, on AI and data, followed by the next one after me will be on infrastructure and energy, two panels about the architecture of globalization. Now, I want to talk about something much older and messier, and that is the people that have to live with these developments, and about what happens when people and nations are humble enough to learn from each other. The first part of this that I'd like to talk about is 家语加薯条，医疗产业以及温州人的精神。And so, my father in the early 1980s, he found himself in a job that was slowly suffocating him. He was clever, he was restless, deeply unfulfilled. So he did what a certain kind of person does in that situation. Like many of you here today, he became an entrepreneur. He started with a fish and chip shop, actually around the year I was born, 1984, 1985. It's not glamorous, it's not a Silicon Valley origin story, but it was his. And from that beginning, he built step by step, year by year, a business that eventually moved from the somewhat unhealthy fish and chips into healthcare and social care and real estate and other industries. And it's a genuine growth story, a life's work. Now, why am I telling this to a group of friends at a China-related conference? Because when I think of my father's journey, I think about the entrepreneurship of China in general, but more specifically, Zhejiang人, Zhejiang. And I think about Wenzhou, the Wenzhou people who for decades epitomized a certain kind of fearless bootstrap capitalism or Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. And he started, as the Zhejiang people, starting from almost nothing, building family networks, scaling fast and going global. My father, unfortunately, never visited China, but his mindset, that hunger, that willingness to start small and build, would have been immediately recognizable on the streets of Wenzhou. And here is the policy lesson embedded in both of these stories. My father didn't succeed in a vacuum. He succeeded because the 1980s brought a liberalization of financing and the healthcare sector in Britain. The policy opened the door and he walked through it. And in China, an even more revolutionary policy change was fermenting. Obviously, the 改革开放78年80年左右那个时候 and the reforms of Deng Xiaoping didn't just release market forces, they created the conditions for a generation of policy entrepreneurs to flourish. Now next, in the 19th century, China faced a profound civilizational crisis. The Opium Wars, the unequal treaties, the humiliation of a great empire brought low by foreign powers. The response in part was the self-strengthening movement, also known as the Yangwu Yundong under Li Hongzhang, and a deliberate state-directed effort to learn from the West. Chinese scholars were sent abroad to Britain, the United States, Germany, Japan. The goal was simple: understand how these nations had surged ahead and bring that knowledge home. Now, here is the question I want to put to the room, is who is doing the equivalent today? China has, in the space of 4 decades, lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It's built the largest Gaotie, high-speed rail network in the world. It's become a global leader in renewable energy, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence. You've heard it all before, you know it, but it's an amazing achievement. And it is, by most measures, the world's largest economy in purchasing power terms. And yet, in much of Britain and Western political life, the dominant instinct has not been curiosity. It has been anxiety. It has been what I observed firsthand in Westminster at tendency to see China only through the lens of threat and not that of opportunity. And for decades, I felt that, like some of my long-standing friends I see here today, like you had Jeff speaking earlier on, a long time living and working in Shanghai, is that what we have been witnessing is simply, I believe, the difficulty of a new law. So a new number one, or, if you don't agree with that, a significant global power in the re-emergence of China. And I think because of that, it's psychological. It takes time. It always does. The United States was uncomfortable with the emergence of Japan in the 1980s. Britain, whenever we were locked down, Japan, where we passed over the responsibilities to America, and there was a certain sense of loss that happened. You know, we were once an empire, losing an empire, trying to find its role in the world. And then these transitions are psychologically difficult, as much as they are, I believe, geopolitical. But I do believe that the tide is turning. The sheer number of world leaders visiting Beijing since the tail end of last year, you've had everyone from the king, the head of government of Spain, you've had Ireland, Michael Martin, you've had the leaders of Germany, you've had France, Macron visiting, Starmer, our own Prime Minister from the UK, back in January time, and obviously the visit of Trump last week. And I also think that tourism to China, it's recovering, it's growing, and polling in several European nations you'll have seen are improving in terms of the views towards China, much better than the pandemic era mindset. So the world is rewiring, to go back to the topic of today's conference. And the question for Britain, for us in the UK, and for the West, is whether we are part of that rewiring or we are simply watching from the sidelines. In green energy, China now manufactures the overwhelming majority of the world's solar panels. In EVs, Chinese brands are competing and winning in markets all over the world. We've just seen the Financial Times wrote a few weeks ago about how in the first quarter, I think, JQ became the leading electric vehicle car being sold in the UK. It's obviously Qirui, also electric vehicle car. And in infrastructure, China is building across Africa, Central Asia, the Global South for these 2 decades, while Western governments have debated the terms. In pharma and life sciences, the speed of Chinese clinical trials and the scale of Chinese genomic data are becoming a structural advantage that Western firms are only beginning to reckon with. The Global South knows where the future energy of the world economy lies. They're not confused about this. It is frankly only some in Western capitals that are confused. US-China relations, that DC is still the number one political capital in the world, but Beijing is most definitely the second world capital when it comes to politics. More painfully, I think, perhaps, is human capital in talent, in the flow of ideas. We in this country have welcomed hundreds of thousands, I don't know what the overall number is, at least 500,000, I believe, of Chinese students who have came to the UK to study at all levels, from primary right through to tertiary. At any one time, given a really good year in those numbers, we have 200,000 students across all those different levels. And we haven't, in our country, in the UK, we haven't done the same. We haven't reciprocated. We haven't sent our students, our executives, our civil servants to learn in China at anything close to the equivalent scale. And that flow has been largely one directional. I know many people here, especially on the UK side of the debate, are kind of getting bored listening to this. Every year there'll be another newspaper story about how we're not China literate enough and whatnot. And like you, I get bored with these same debates over and over again. So I want to return to these flows of human capital, because I think that's where the deepest rewiring needs to happen. The Chinese students who came to the West in the 19th, 20th century and now didn't come just to nadao wenping or to get a degree. Maybe some of you did, I don't know. But it was also much more than that. I think a lot of people have come to understand a different way of thinking, of organizing a society, economy, and governance. And many have returned to China to transform your country, their country. So I believe we're on the cusp of that beginning to happen in reverse, not through politics, because politicians are often the last to move, but through tourism, through business, through academic exchange, through relationships formed in rooms like this one. And I want to say something here that I think is genuinely underappreciated in Western business education. And many of you aspire to be entrepreneurs, and that's a magnificent ambition. I would say that there's also something very unique in how China has transformed its economy and society over recent decades. And I think of something academically I often studied years ago on this, 乡镇企业. the township and village enterprises of the 1980s and 1990s. These were engines of China's growth. They defied every Western economic category, and they were not purely state-owned. They were not purely private entities. They were embedded in local government relationships driven by local officials who were simultaneously administrators, and they were entrepreneurs, people who understood how to navigate the interface between policy, capital, community, and market. They were policy entrepreneurs, and they built something extraordinary. The MBA, which this institution that we're in, has done so much to define globally, teaches market entrepreneurship, how to raise capital, how to scale, how to optimize. But the world we are now entering, where the state is back, where industrial policy is back, and where the old Washington consensus is somewhat crumbling, may require something more. A new kind of business education, one that teaches the political economy of business, the nexus of government, market, and community. We've had the MBA, we've had the MPA, the MPP. What comes next, I think, is going to be truly exciting. And I also believe that that learning program that may emerge in the nexus between those two things will probably not emerge from Harvard or Oxford. It will emerge from China. The London Business School was founded with a mission to have a profound impact on the way the world does business. That mission has never felt more alive or urgent than right now, because, as President Xi Jinping speaks of, 百年未有之大变局, profound changes on scene in a century, a world being remade, power shifting, old certainties dissolving. And he is right. He is describing something very real. We are living through a reordering of the global economy, of technology, geopolitics, and the very idea of who leads and who follows. You, the students in this room, are sitting at this exact center point of what is happening. And I do believe, over the years, that China and the Chinese people I see in front of me has very much a winning mentality, a deep civilizational confidence rooted in the knowledge that China has been at the center of human history for much of history, and that is, in its own understanding, a returning home. The question is not whether China will shape this century, but that has already been answered. The question is whether the West, we in the West, can find the wisdom, humility of the 19th century reformers, in China's case, who crossed oceans to learn, to engage, rather than retreat. I believe that that was the significance of President Trump's visit to China last week, an attempt to show that the West recognizes what China has achieved. And you, this generation of LBA students, soon to be graduates, are uniquely placed to be the people who make that engagement happen, not just as business leaders, but as the human element in this rewired world. LBS mission is to have a profound impact on the way the world does business. That mission has been written long before any of us were in this room, but I think it was written for your generation, because the most profound impact on the way the world does business will come from those who understand both sides of this world and have the courage to bring them together. 到此结束，谢谢大家。Thank you. Do we have time for 一个两个问题? Does anyone want to ask a question before I go off stage? Anyone? 不要害羞啊。你中文也可以啊，啥英文我也讲。我也讲啊，不要搞，开玩笑，发笑了。有啊。
As we transition to this period where we're confident to build powers, how would you recommend we, as individuals and as businesses and people around us, working together to move forward, and how we try and approach? I think very different approaches between person.
Yeah, I think that psychological element, that's a great question. The psychological element I was talking about, I think it runs both ways, because the West, unlike many of the people, they see many friends I know from LinkedIn, but I've never met before here in the audience. That's couple of decades, 3 decades ago, when some people in this room went to China for the first time, we could see that China was 崛起起来, and I often think back to the first time when I arrived in Shanghai and I came out of the 那个时候叫南京东路地铁，现在对，那个时候叫河南南京东路。And when I came out of the detail, I was like, wow, 这个城市比我贝尔法斯特大多了. I was like, it's more developed than Belfast. And this was 20 years ago, right? And you've added an Australian economy to your economy every year since that. And, I think that it will take time for people here to get used to China becoming more important and being more influential and having more of a say on things. That's our job to try and get used to, I believe. But I think China as well, maybe one of the biggest challenges you have is that perhaps you're not used to being Nama de Changda, and you still sometimes, I think, it's personal opinion, I'm not telling you how to do your foreign policy, but sometimes I think you get involved, you get angry about things, which, So I think you also have to get used, you have to get comfortable to your own power and how you use it. I think it's how, China spent the last, so I'm a semi-retired politician, so I'm always talking in terms of power, right? But you've spent the last century trying to get power, and now you have it. So now it's what you do with it. It's got to be incredibly important. Great question, thank you. Next, one more, and then I'll finish because I know you're...
UK investment to China, and the problem of the Chinese market is the foreign shareholders is very low, like in the capital market, it's 30% compared to Korea, like Japan. And when I was doing something like on like the UK, like the British government, they don't really trust Chinese capital markets. And you as a British, what you really looking for and to cooperate with Chinese private equity, like what quality are you really looking for?
That's what actually I went to LSE. I know with an LSE India in the audience today. We were actually there at the back with an LSE student who's crept in. The leader of the Chinese student business forum, right? Lyndon Fajian. Yeah, I was trying to translate it into Chinese. Yeah. So, but at LSE I was doing the political side, not the economic side. Unfortunately, I think that it's very true that most Western investors, as a layman, from what I understand, don't see a compulsion to invest in Chinese shares for exactly the reasons that you're talking about. I mean, I know from my own personal experience, one time I did work for a 民营企业 in China, and wow, 那个工作很辛苦啊，那个真的是996啊。And the only job I found more stretching was doing politics and working in a Chinese private company. And at the time, there was like a lot of struggles because of different investments and we're playing on the capital market. But it just, it doesn't work the same. And I suppose Western commentators will just say that it's not a pure market in the same way as the stock markets that we have in Western countries. And I think that's the biggest difference. But then that feeds in, I suppose, to what I'm saying on that idea that China, you have invented something new, and you've brought together this idea of state and commerce kind of working together. It's not to say these things existed private-public partnerships in the past, but the scale with which China has done it is completely different, and I'd be interested to see what happens next on that. I'll take one more question quickly, and then I promise you have to go. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Down here.